Hello, everyone, and welcome to Ethereum Core Developer Meeting 92. Thanks for tuning in or watching live. I'm going to pass this over to James, who will be running the meeting today. Go ahead, James.
Thank you, Hudson. Good morning, everybody. We are in Ethereum Core Developers Call 92, and we're going to start with a retrospective on the last call, where we went into 5 whys and things around client development. And this month, we've kind of taken a step back to look at core development and core developers. And so I'll turn this over to Alexi to give a summary of that, and then we'll have Pooja give the update. Is that correct, Alexi?
Yeah, so thank you. I have written the retrospective from my point of view on the Ethereum Magician thread, but I'm just going to very shortly go over it. The Piper has suggested to use the 5 whys methodology to try to drive the discussion, which we kind of tried to do a little bit. And so I've counted that we went like three levels deep in terms of asking why. And but first, before you even start asking why, we have to figure out what the problem is, because this methodology forces you to do that. And so I realized that when we define the problem, that is it's apparently like we have a problem that there's only one implementation, which basically runs most of the critical installations. And then I realized we don't even know if this is definitely true. We have a sense of this, that it's true, but I'm not sure if it's definitely true. And also the fact that there is a pressure on the development team. Again, one of the questions I wanted to ask today, since we have Peter and Martin here, is that why exactly do they feel under pressure? But anyway, so if we assume that the problem does exist, even without basically strict data, then we started asking questions about why is this the case? Why do we not have other implementations? And then I came up with, I think I've heard at least 4 different answers. So first of all, Go Ethereum is the oldest and the most trusted implementation, and it's unlikely to run out of money because it's backed by Ethereum Foundation. Number 2 is that the other implementation do not offer the same functionality and any significant difference in performance or operators experience. Number 3 is that we have a lack of standards of external interfaces. That's why that was mentioned after the call by Tim, that sometimes it's not easy to get people to switch from one to another, because there is this disparity in how the, let's say, JSON RPC behaves. And then number 4 is that people could run multiple implementations to mitigate some kind of risk of the defect in Go Ethereum, but it is at extra cost, and then a lot of times it might not be justified from business point of view. So yeah, thank you. So, and the reason for that is because we don't even know how to quantify this kind of risk. It comes back to the point that we don't actually have a data about like how many critical installations we're running on the Go Ethereum. And secondly, like there's this view of the systemic risk. Oh, if something happens, it's going to happen to everyone. So why do I need to bother about this? And then I'm not going to read you out through this whole thing because I think we can come to it again. But yeah, so there are a couple of things we could do already. That what I would like to Pooja to talk about is I suggested that we actually do start somehow measuring the critical installation to first of all answer the question: is it really true that the Go Ethereum is the kind of the predominantly used by the critical installation? And secondly, will we be able to assess our progress if we're trying to change this? How are we going to know that anything is changing? And obviously, we have to be really careful about gathering this data because it's quite sensitive. The raw data is quite sensitive, so we need to be able to aggregate it without leaking the sensitive information. Yeah, so please, I give it to Pooja.
Thank you, Alexi. First of all, I would like to begin with this. Like, the cat herdder has started collecting information with the help of a survey. I'm going to share the link in the chat so that if people have not responded so far, may go ahead and respond to the survey. This is basically to collect the information about major installations such as the mining node, mining pools, wallet exchanges, and wherever. If somebody is having Ethereum node and they are having like multiple nodes, we would like to collect this information. Based on the responses that we have received so far, it appears yes, Get is one of the major client that is being used by people here. But the good part is in the survey question, we had one of the questions like, if you are supposed to, or if you are willing to think about having an archive node, an alternative to your present client, not specifically to Get whatever you are running, would you be able would you be happy to consider any other client? And the options are coming up good. Besu is one of the highest selected so far, but this response is very few because we started the survey just few days back, and we hope to get more information and we would be updating about how the progress is going. But I think that this is certainly going to give us a good picture of where we are today and where we can be if we start working towards the getting balance in the client acceptance. So yeah, that's it from my end.
Yeah, any comment, because I would really like to hear anybody commenting on like the approach and what you think of this and stuff like that.
Was that question for me?
No, it's a question it's inviting the discussion about the, I would like people to speak out about whether they think this is the correct approach, whether we could achieve this, how do we expand this, how do we make sure that everybody who is running critical installation will get chance to participate and stuff like that.
I think one simple thing is I believe there's a list of like operators that we contact when there's a hard fork, and just reaching out to those. Like there's a pretty extensive list somewhere. I think Hudson or James, you must have it, yeah. But that just lists most of the exchanges, mining pools, etc. So we could probably literally go through that list and reach out to people and just kind of track what percentage of it has answered. Yeah.
Yes, Cat Herders has that list and we are considering that. Thank you for that.
Yeah, I think that approach makes sense from one perspective. But I was thinking also if we could use the ENR data published in the ETH discovery, we run a crawler which crawls through the network and dumps out the ENRs from all the nodes. There are two things I'm not certain about. That's how many clients have implemented ENR, and secondly, whether client information is part of the ENR or not.
Yeah, so one of the reasons why I suggested to go with this kind of more manual approach is that the kind of any automated information that you gather doesn't tell you anything about how critical that particular node is. We know that probably the longer term learning nodes are likely to be critical, but we don't even know. Basically, what we don't know is that what is the impact of this specific node going down or having a consensus failure. So we kind of know how many of them, but what is the impact of them going down, or how many, maybe, for example, there could be a hypothetical situation that we see in the crawler, the majority of the clients are Go Ethereum, but in reality, let's say that 60% are running Besu. And then you're basically having distorted information about the impact, or it could be the other way around.
Also, does the ENR crawler differentiate between light clients and full clients?
I would say yes, but I think maybe Peter, you know better.
Sorry?
Does ENR information contain information whether it's a full node or light node?
Light nodes are not advertising ENRs. So it doesn't make sense for a light client to advertise it because it's those connections are ephemeral, so they come and go. And the point of ENRs are to be a stable list of reliable peers in the network.
And secondly, Peter, I don't know if you heard my first question, whether the ENR containing information about what client it is.
No.
Open Ethereum, right?
No, as far as I know, it's not advertised, and we might want to ask Felix, but as far as I know, it was a deliberate choice that you should not be able to tell what. So you should not be interested in what the client is. I think that was one of the underlying ideas behind not advertising it.
Yeah, and that kind of makes sense because otherwise you could be used to like find targets for a particular vulnerability.
Yeah, this is actually quite a good point because you know, we do need to make it very carefully to preserve the privacy of the individual operators so that they are confident to provide us information. Therefore, when I looked at the forum, one comment I had is you know, you made the organization name mandatory. I don't know whether this information is stored somewhere, this forum, I don't know. Like, do people have a concern about the potential, you know, what is the damage could be done if this information gets leaked or something like that?
So at this point in time, this information is just stored as a Excel sheet, but we are trying not to share it with public, and that was the reason we tried to keep some of the questions as optional for now. Like if people are worried about getting it leaked or something, they may not prefer to answer, but at least they would be giving the information about the nodes that we want to collect as primary data.
We could also do like a different, like a more secure solution in the future. I know there's encrypted solutions like doing like a key-based repo or password manager vault or other things like that we could look into.
But what is the impact of the what is the predicted impact of a leak of such information?
In my mind, it would be something like if a mining pool talks about its infrastructure and then someone targets a DDoS attack towards a specific client because that mining pool is primarily that client, and then another competing mining pool, you know, is using another client, for instance. That like is one possibility. I don't really see it as a major possibility, but that's like one attack. And then yeah, there's a number of things. It's mainly I don't know, just seemingly giving up your infrastructure data can put you at risk for, you know, if there is some kind of vulnerability, just exploiting it to take down your network.
Yeah, so the reason I'm asking this question is basically if we construct the questionnaire in such a form to minimize the impact of potential leak, that could make it better. So you got to go through the questions again and look at which answers could increase the impact, the negative impact of the leak. And so in second component is the probability of the leak as well. So if you do sort of risk assessment, like what is the, you know, this is where you can do encryption and stuff like this. But if you already can minimize the impact of any leak, let's say that you don't disclose a specific version of the client, and if everybody's in any case everybody kind of assumes that most people are using Go Ethereum, then there's no harm in just confirming it, right?
Yeah.
So essentially what I'm seeing is that if you can go carefully through the questions again and construct it in such a way that impact is completely minimal, so people are not going to be too worried about participating. And the second thing I wanted to bring up is regarding to this data gathering, is that it occurred to me that if such data, obviously in aggregated format, is available on ongoing basis, let's say it's published every month or something like that, obviously you can figure out how to do it more frequently. But anyway, this could be already quite useful for the operators themselves to have a coordination point, because at the moment they're pretty much in the dark. They don't know. I mean, they kind of making the same assumptions that as we're making, that most people running Go Ethereum, and therefore they basically, they don't really think that they can change anything. But I think if we could show them that this is the picture and this is what the potential impact could be, and you will be one of the people affected, then they might justify, from their business point of view, they justify extra spending on reducing that risk and saying, okay, so if we invest X amount of dollars in running a second instance, then we're going to be more protected from the systemic risk. And then we hopefully, kind of a couple of months later, we will see this reflected in the data.
That makes a ton of sense to me. And we can definitely look over the survey again and edit it.
Any other questions from, yeah?
Well, reflecting on my experience reaching out for hard fork coordination and just trying to get getting information to node operators has been really difficult, and we've seen the last few forks still a pretty large number of nodes that initially fall off, even if they come back on during the time of when a network or when a hard fork switches. And so I guess there's a part of me that wonders how much we really can know in it of what's all going out there, and then perhaps, because even if we get data, verifying that it is the actual data is also kind of difficult on its own part, and it just seems like a lot of effort where it might be worth, this is just a hypothesis, it might be worth saying that most systems tend to an exponential distribution without some kind of doing something else to it. And so if that is the case, then what are things we could do to avoid that? And just think of what we can do in the case that we are unevenly distributed, do the things that would be safe anyway. And then if we are safe now, then we're just double safe.
I don't know. I'm not sure what you're suggesting, to be honest, but I think we do have an issue that because of basically we're running at the moment, everybody is free. It's basically free for all. Everybody is defending for themselves. They don't have a useful kind of coordination point. So everybody thinks that, they have to make the decisions according to their own, rationale, according to their whatever profit-based business model or something like that. And they don't see the way to coordinate with others in a useful way. So if you're basically giving up on that, I don't know what you can come up with. So I'm actually just trying to get rid of at least some of the externalities that we have in the system.
If we assume that there is a problem in the distribution of clients among critical, then we could come up with things that we can do to help mitigate that. And then do them. And let's say that there isn't actually a problem. We haven't made anything worse by taking those steps. Like we've only.
So are you suggesting not to do this not to try to do survey?
Oh no, to do the survey, and then but also be thinking about what do we do about it, and perhaps just do things anyway, because it may not be.
No, that's not the only thing we'd like to do, but I think it's very useful to have some kind of data to back this up. And if there's no more comments, I wanted to ask another question kind of related to that.
I guess one more thing on the survey that I think would be the most valuable is if you assume that part of the respondents do share, that they run more than one client as part of their infrastructure, trying to understand and maybe not expose is the wrong word, but explain how they do that to others. can be a good way, at least, at the very least for client developers, but also for other operators that want to run multiple nodes. The challenge, I think, is like the more valuable that information is, the least likely it is for people to maybe want to give it out. But I don't know. I think there's a reasonable shot at trying to look at the commonalities across people that run more than one client and what are they doing, and maybe like just document that better and make that available more broadly in the community.
Well, I think when I actually first suggested this idea, I thought immediately of the Ethereum card holders as the kind of one of the organizations who could do that. And my first thought not about doing it as a survey, but actually some kind of interview, because I assume that the Ethereum card holders do have a sort of like a list of contacts in the critical installations. And so they can actually just talk to the people, and then because it just takes like 1 minute phone call to figure out like all this data, and also additionally you can ask more questions, like if you encounter these interesting cases.
Yeah, I think the survey is probably like a good like funnel for the interviews. Like James said, it's like you don't get everybody answering, but those who do, a subset of those will probably be available for like a 15-30-minute call.
And also I would say that the other thing if everybody agrees that this is what we want to do, we need essentially coordinated information campaign to make sure that everybody who needs to know about this knows about this. And because I know that we have a great, there are lots of things that everybody starts finding out really quickly. Why can't we do it for this thing? Because it's like, there are information like propaganda, I would say, sources to get the information into every corner of the ecosystem. And I think we should totally, if we agree that this is what we want to make it a success, I think we should totally utilize those things. Right. And if no more comments, I actually want to ask another question, which I started to think about. So it's mostly to Martin and Peter on the Go Ethereum team. Is so what actually? So we talked 2 meetings before about the pressure that you guys are feeling about the correctness of the code and about like possibility of the defect that would affect the larger ecosystem. So what makes you believe that where this pressure is coming from? So what is your biggest fear essentially in this case?
So I talked a bit about that during the last DevCon, where I highlighted some issues that have historically happened, which are consensus issues and which are denial of service issues. And I mean, such things happen. And basically, if denial of service happens on a node which has 60 or 70% of the network, then I mean that's the good case if 70% of the network goes down. But in the worst case, it follows on a bad path, and we have major problems.
But this 70% that you're talking about, most of the time you just assume that that's the case, right?
Yes.
Okay. Because that's what I wanted to find out. Because did this pressure kind of increase over last, let's say 2-3 years, because you assume there's more and more people running Go Ethereum, right?
Yes.
Okay. So, but that's why I think that this is actually even more important to figure out, to stop assuming that and actually try to check that if that's the case, if we're actually on the right track.
Right, but so until proven otherwise, I assume the worst case, which is that 70% are running Go Ethereum.
Okay, and I also wanted to, sorry.
Well, and this kind of goes back to what I was trying to say of that even if it's not the worst case, it's still worth doing the things, whatever it is we decide, to make sure that we are maintain this distribution. Like whatever amount of
yeah, I know
the
reason I'm asking the reason I'm asking these questions, and because I want people to think about, if you have these kind of highly emotional things, and the way to kind of calm them down is to try to substitute some of the assumptions for the data, because you might be surprised, or you might just know exactly that's my worry is justified totally. And when you know that your worry is justified, it's not just you who is going to worry now, it's everybody else who will worry, because in the absence of the data, you are the only person who worries, because everybody sees the completely different picture. Everything is fine, Ethereum is running, right? Like what are you guys worrying about? So yeah, I want to make this substantiated, this kind of this particular impact. And I also want to ask another question: is there is also connection with the gas pricing, block gas limit increase, and this was is how actually this whole thing started. Is like, what is the safe gas limit? And I would like to understand, and maybe we should let everybody else to understand, what happens if, let's say, how does the problem unravels if we, let's say, raise the gas price limit to unsafe value, let's say to 20 million right now. So what will happen? Can we even think about what kind of problems will start happening, and how does it going to occur, and who is going to suffer first? Because people at the moment see it as a purely kind of hypothetical thing, because most of them don't even go deep enough to actually see what's going to happen, because they assume it's never going to happen. So anybody has thought about this?
Sure.
Yes.
Now,
go ahead, Peter.
So imagine that, let's suppose we raise the gas limit, and all of a sudden it becomes possible to create blocks that take 30 seconds to process. Now, what do you do that? Essentially, we re-enter the Shanghai denial of service factors, where you just have to do something to, I mean, what do you do? How do you solve it if all of a sudden blocks take 30 seconds to process?
But if the miners are the ones that raise the block gas limit, they surely would think that it would be okay for them to process such a block. Because I've heard from the miners, they say, so from the one mining pool, that in order to be profitable, you have to be able to process a block within 40 milliseconds. So surely, if they're talking about average cases, I suppose.
But average case is completely pointless. So, I mean, who cares what the average case is? What I care about is that the network doesn't crash and burn.
So what about if we start, I don't know, I mean, how do we make this kind of thing a reality? Because if we see that everybody is relying on average cases and see very, very sort of different picture from what you see if you look at the worst cases, can we actually produce the worst cases? Can we put them out? Is it going to be super expensive?
I'm not sure I follow your question there, Alexei.
So basically what I'm saying is that, is it conceivable for us to demonstrate, let's say that if whatever is currently gas limit, 12 million blocks, right? 12 million sort of gas. Okay, so if we construct a block which takes whatever it is, what is the worst block you can construct?
It's going to cost over $300 a block. It's 12 million Gwei gas multiplied by 100 Gwei.
Okay. Yeah, so that's if we do that, and how long is this going to be processed? And if we actually warn everybody to watch out for this block, and I say this particular, I mean, at some point there will be a block and it will be that much. I mean, how do we even produce that block? Like the mechanics of this attack is important.
Yeah. So would you want us to deliberately do the blueprint attack on Ethereum network?
I mean, if that's what it takes to demonstrate it, because it's just the hypothetical suggestion. Because the problem I can see now, there is this rift in perception between what some people call the community and the core developers, because the community sees the like a smooth operation and average cases, and they don't understand mostly what's the problem of raising the limit. I mean, because like everything is fine, like why don't you just raise it a bit more? So I don't know how to get this message across.
I think there's a more of like a fundamental sort of how people are looking at the network problem too there, because if I'm using MetaMask and I send my transaction and it goes through, I'm not thinking that my transaction needs to go through in 9 months from now. Like that it works today and that it works for the next 10 minutes and that it works for the next 5 days is very different towards the core developers who are thinking I'm working on this client for the next year and a half or 2 years of my life, so it needs to keep like the time frame and the incentives of the people involved. And even miners aren't generally thinking that far in advance, so it's going to be hard to get them to viscerally experience something that they may not actually really care about because their time frame is so different.
Well, for example, one possible way to address this is Etherscan has a really nice, awesome charts, but all these charts are historical charts. What we could try to do is essentially keep live charts, so to say, future estimates that if, so essentially just extending the charts that Etherscan has so that we also have future estimates, and then based on the growth of the last whatever time, be that 1 day, 1 week, 1 month, you can estimate that how will the network look like in a year, in 3 years, in 5 years. And maybe that would help people understand what it means to just double something. So what effect it has on the future, on various metrics.
That's a great idea.
But the kind of the more fundamental reason why I'm asking this question is because I have a feeling, still now, that we are discussing this issue here, but I do not really see a lot of, like, I don't see a lot of like the sort of not support necessarily, but it's not really seen as a very, as I feel it, it's not really seen as very important thing. Is there are like the EIP 1559 seems to be much more important than this, for example, from what I could gather, because everybody knows about it, everybody wants it. It's probably because the price of Ether is supposed to be going up. But I just trying to understand like why so are we just basically just trying to do it in is it a futile attempt to do that?
Like, I mean, one thing is that there isn't just kind of a very clear and direct pointer to what the proposed fix is. Like 1559 is, I think, popular just because it is a thing and it exists, and kind of we know what it is. Whereas if it's more of this kind of vague effort and it's there's some problems and let's think about how to improve it, then that's just something that people are going to be less excited than if you just say here's a proposal and here's a catchy name for it and let's go implement it. And I think like if you have that, then all of the kind of community people would be in favor of it.
I also think, like, isn't that what ETH2 is? And I know like that obviously it's not live yet and whatnot, but like basically as long as demand for block space will exceed the supply, like the prices will go up. And it seems like the increases we're seeing now are not like a 10, 20, 30% increase in block size, which is, what we'll be getting by increasing the ETH1 block size. Like we need like a multiple orders of magnitude fix. And that's just like not gonna happen in the next at least 6 months, like to a year, like being very optimistic. So
I mean, roll-ups could do it before a year, but you see it would take longer.
Yeah, and I think that's also something I don't know. Like like you mentioned, 1559, people kind of see that as a solution, but like it won't solve this.
Right.
Increasing the block gas limit to 15,000 or 18,000 won't solve this. You know, they'll all marginally improve, but it won't bring gas prices down to 2 GUE for sure.
I mean, like the other one example of a concrete fix is just like the skinny gas repricing that I proposed, and that's just like one example of something that's kind of conceptually simple enough that it would theoretically be able to catch on.
The problem isn't the problem state size growth and block processing, not like from the protocol layer.
Well, so there's 2 problems, right? Like one problem is the DOS attacks, and the other, which is a kind of a short-term problem, like what if someone attacks us, and then the other problem is state size growth, which is it's a long-term problem. So like someone can't use state size growth to cause the network to break within the next week, but it's just like expected degradation over a few years. And I guess so. Like we do want to kind of treat those two problems separately, because they are kind of technically at least somewhat separate. And as for actually solving that second problem, and stateless clients exist as a thing, but
is there an inflection point where we go from the services degraded to things being actually terrible as far as state size growth is?
Well, the problem is that like the cost of accessing state is logarithmic in the size of a state, so it's it is fairly linear, or at least it seems to be. Like there could be, like from the point of view of each individual computer, there's going to be a point where like your disk goes from being 95% to 98% full, and then suddenly you're defragging everything and like it breaks. But that's more of a kind of one node at a time thing, and not a kind of everything simultaneously breaks thing. But like, I mean, chronic problems are problems that we do need to take seriously, because like just from a kind of social psychology point of view, the acute things are easier to coordinate solutions around, but chronic things, like they can cause as much damage, but it never comes all at once. So like it's not a reason to not care about it. It's the opposite.
So just to add a bit to that, the biggest problem that with state growth that we have, and that's one of the reasons why we're kind of opposed to pushing the gas limit too high, is because essentially during Shanghai we had this, so the experience was that Shanghai attacks first started by bloating the state, and after the state was bloated up quite a bit, then we had various attacks on various caches and whatnot. And after Shanghai, essentially the first solution was to make state bloat expensive, so that the attacker couldn't send in more chunk. And the second part of the solution was to actually delete all that thing. Now the issue is that if we just, let's suppose we ignore DOS blocks for now, and let's just increase the gas limit to whatever the network can handle, the state keeps growing, but at the point where we reach it, where we reach this inflection point that if something goes wrong, there's no way turning back. So there's nothing we can delete. So we can make things more expensive, but we cannot just delete stuff anymore. And I guess that's something that we need to take care of and look at from various perspectives. So you need to look at it from disk loads, disk reads, you need to look at it from disk writes, you need to look at it from synchronization perspective. And it's fine to push it, but you kind of need to be aware that if the state doubles, then what happens in synchronization? Because I can tell you that if, for at least as long as we have fast sync, if the state doubles, then fast sync time won't double, it will probably go up exponentially. And these are the numbers which I don't even think core developers know. They just have a feel for it. And maybe if we were to try to somehow visualize them and see that, okay, if the state is 10 gigs, how much does a fast sync run? If the state is 20 gigs, how much does a fast sync run? And if we can somehow chart these out, then we could perhaps, we ourselves could see whether this is a problem or not.
So
But definitely the thing that we need to take care of is not to enter territory from which we cannot go back. The block gas limit from a denial of service perspective, it at the worst case, let's suppose somebody figures out a way to attack the network, we will have 3 very shitty days to bring the block gas limit down, but eventually it can be brought down. So the DOS can be, so to say, stopped. But the state that once pushed into Ethereum cannot be removed.
So we're having charts and then perhaps a report that we could have someone do a report on these kind of things specifically. Sounds like the thing to do.
Well, but all these things would, in my opinion, just help explain what the core devs are afraid of. They won't really help solve the problem in any shape or form.
Yeah, so I actually did not want to jump too early into proposing solutions, and I actually did propose a few things over the last few weeks around and I don't think it's kind of good to try to propose them here because there's not much time and people just need to kind of read them and think about them. But I wanted to also remind that we also had a slight disagreement on the previous call it's just for people who probably weren't there. And so there was a point, if we go through these, the retrospective again, so one of the why questions, so we kind of, there was an agreement that it was very difficult to write a fully functional Ethereum implementation, which is also performant. And this is where we started to ask like a level 3 whys. And then we came up with different answers, just about four answers I've recorded. And so the Ethereum protocol is basically just very hard to implement in a performant way. So something inherent about it. Then the second one is that we're dealing with such big volumes of data transfer and computation that you have to do the constant optimizations, and these optimizations are cutting across component boundaries and just ruin modularity gradually. That's the sense I got from last call. But my own views on this is that there is nothing inherently super bad in Ethereum protocol. Actually, we just started off with a bad architecture a few years ago, and the optimizations could be done in such a way that the modules are still preserved, but it actually requires a lot of work. And so so I see it as that we could probably do a lot of technical work over a lot of period of time and fix this issue, the architectural issue, to make it a bit easier or much more easier for people to jump in and start taking the ownership of specific components, relieve the burden of the one single team. But that sort of my skepticism about this is that will this be worth it? Do we actually have enough sort of resources for this? Does anybody even want this to happen? Or do they want us to just basically coast along until Ethereum 2 comes around and then we just basically just kill this whole thing?
Well, just to argue a bit against that. So a lot of people see it as Ethereum 2 as the solution to all this problem. And essentially what I want to emphasize, I emphasized this a few times already, that Ethereum 2 will introduce N shards. Now, I'm not sure what the number currently is, whether it's 256 or whatever the constant number of shards.
64.
64, okay, thank you. So that means that if Ethereum 2 will cut the current problem in 64, that's kind of 2 orders of magnitude. But that still means that we're just kicking the can down the road. So these problems still need to be solved for Ethereum 2 too. Of course, that it would probably mean that we have X more years to solve it, but the problems themselves won't disappear. So we can't just ignore and wait for Ethereum 2.
Oh, no. I wasn't suggesting to wait for it. So I'm talking not about the sort of technical problems, but more about organizational problems. So let's say that if we may come up with a brilliant plan, we create the architecture working group as I suggested, and we figure out the correct architecture, we start building components, we start doing amazing optimizations on all the components, we get the good specialists to optimize them to hell and things like this. But the question is somebody is going to allow us to do this? Or should we just jump into Ethereum 2 and do that work there? Because actually they will have exactly the same issues. They will ruin their modularity by cross-cutting optimizations and so forth. So that was my question.
Well, my answer to that is Ethereum 2 is in a very, very unique position, and I think we should definitely use and abuse that position, namely that, so one of the shards of Ethereum 2 will obviously be Ethereum 1, and that shard will forever bear the burden of every bad decision ever made. But for the rest of the shards, it's a really unique opportunity to fix the bad ideas. For example, this is just an example. I'm not definitely not necessarily endorsing it or want it, but for example, state rent cannot be introduced on Ethereum 1. Alex, you've tried quite a lot and you know why. But in Ethereum 2, it actually could be introduced, because the moment you are building a new system and the moment you are launching a new shard with no contracts in it, it is fine to have a different set of rules. And I'm sure that we could dream up a couple more rules which would make scalability a lot easier to do if we had a fresh slate. So maybe that is actually a good position, good point to take, is to try to figure out what are the simplest no-brainer architectural changes that should have been done but cannot be done anymore, and maybe let's try to do that for Ethereum 2. And then maybe the solution there is to say that, well, 63 shards will be super performant, and then we will have the 64th ETH1 shard, which will be a bit crappier, but yeah, that's legacy and that's the price.
The going back to Alex's comment earlier, about resources and being able to do this, are things that we could do that don't really take resources, but would change the game, so to say, for the community and encourage people to do their own work. Us doing all this information and us including the Ethereum cat herders and the people on this call going and finding out is the network sufficiently distributed, is there vulnerabilities and all those things, is could take a lot of resources, and then doing research and publishing all this stuff about making sure that the client distribution actually being distributed is important. That's all a lot of resources from our end that needs to kind of push or make something happen. Whereas if we said, like, something simple we could say is we won't push hard forks unless the network is sufficiently distributed among clients. And then once that is said, the network around us will figure out how to say, is it sufficiently distributed? Because they're going to want things to be included. And so orienting everyone to work towards the same goal rather than us trying to make it all happen. Like, I guess there are simple things we can do that don't take, but it just takes deciding them.
Well, I see where it's coming from, this particular idea that, you can put more restrictions on, like gatekeeping on the IPs and expect everybody, just the world around us to adjust. But I think the issue I take with this approach is that it sort of simplifies the stakeholders to just one group. Like it's us and then them. So there's basically us core developers and them everybody else. But in fact, there are so many of them, and different people are doing different things. And it might be that by putting this restriction, you're actually going to unfairly affect some people who are actually doing most of the work, but you're not going to do anything to the people who are actually who you do want to take action. So it's essentially like it might be completely useless and even harmful to impose restrictions, because if you know that the people who you want to restrict are not incentivized to do anything about it, then it's completely useless and it's even harmful. So I need to, I want to.
But that is if the network doesn't want to get to work together to distribute their client implementations, then they don't want the features that they want to come through the forks to happen, and so then we could just work on optimizations.
No, this assumes that the people who want these new features are the same people who are running critical installation, which I think is not really the case. I mean,
it also assumes that people who want the new features care about client diversity, but I can imagine, you know, some stakeholder groups saying, you know what, we don't care, we just want Geth, and we're fine with that. So
yeah, but if you tie the feature to having distribution, then they will care about it. Like if we said 1559 won't happen without client being sufficiently decentralized to then you have immediately everyone that wants 1559 is going to be very interested in how can we make sure that the client that everyone is downloading different clients.
But how do we prevent that from just being you know, just something to appease us, and then as soon as that's out they just switch back? It doesn't seem like a very sustainable solution.
Well, we've already seen the clients installed become pretty sticky, and there are if the network doesn't want anything more, then that's fine.
My fear is that's not what's going to happen. They won't like install Basesu just to get 1559. They'll just say this is bullshit. Like just implement 1559 in Geth, and we'll pay it, and we'll download that. I feel it might be like more adversarial than collaborative. So that's what I'm scared about. It's like that backlash.
And yes, and I also don't want to encumber this data that we would like to collect, that we're talking in the beginning of the meeting. I do not want to have any incentive for people to lie to us. And if you try to encumber these metrics with other things, then immediately you create incentive for people to lie. And that is increasing the likelihood that we get rubbish data, essentially.
And there is no stopper from these players from just taking Geth and just changing the client identifier in code. It's not like it's rocket science.
Yes, I don't want to derail the conversation further on this. It's
okay, it's fine.
Yeah, I see a lot of discomfort put on client teams, and so I don't think there is a world where somehow we're going to not discomfort someone. So and if things are to remain how they are, the same. Actually, let me just change topics and then I'll respond to Lexi, and then I want to move on.
I think going back to one of the initial proposals of Alexi's, like if we are even in doubt of accuracy of this data that we are trying to collect here, I'm leaning towards thinking that if we can make the organization name as a mandatory field for people to go, like write it down there, maybe that can be one of the ways to assure that the data we are getting is not all all bad data. They can be reliable.
I think the best way to make sure the data is good is to make sure people will willingly provide it, and there was no reason to basically provide the bad data. That's, I think, the only way you can actually make sure that this is correct. Any other way is going to fail, because people always are very clever to work around the rules.
So just to give an example, if I would decide that I want to run with Go Ethereum, and somebody would tell me that, well, I have to run something else for a fork to happen, then honestly, personally, I would run Go Ethereum, and then I would start 10 more Go Ethereum nodes, which would just fake their IDs. Or I would just modify mine to fake its ID. So the problem is that this is so easy to circumvent that it's...
All right. The other thing that I've been mostly trying to observe these calls and these conversations, and I've something that and not try to go too much into things. Something that I had saw in the first call at the very end, and it kind of the pressing need that comes to me, maybe it's just because of my role, and that's why I feel that way, and maybe I'm overfeeling the situation. Berlin is technically all clients are ready for Berlin, pretty much. And at the end of the call, the different clients here went through and said, yeah, we have support of Berlin, we have support of Berlin, we have support of Berlin. But at the end of the day, Berlin is like, even though all the clients have it integrated, it's not ready to go to hit live on the network. And what I was noticing, what it felt like to me, was that there was a sense of, yeah, we already have Berlin integrated, so let me just wash my hands. And then, but all the clients are washing their hands, and then Geth is left with well, we actually have to make sure that this is done, and like the state tests and all of those things are sufficient. And so then in that moment, I saw the pressure happening, where certain clients are stepping back. And so, and a lot of the things we've talked about seem like stuff that will help in 6 to 9 months if we start working on them now. But I don't see, I'd like at least something to come out of this that we could be doing in the short term that would address that problem.
So I thought we discussed that on the very first call. We had this conversation, and there was the idea of like Martin starting to host this sort of fuzzing call, right? And I think we wanted to maybe push that back after July, because Martin, you were going to take some time off to decompress. But I mean, I think that still feels like a good idea to me. I'd be curious to hear what other people think.
Yeah. Well, actually, I did send out the new invitations, I think yesterday or the day before yesterday. So I reached out to Bisu and to Open Ethereum and to Nethermind, and also Alex Lasso. And so that's happening. So I guess the first one of those with the new participants will be on Monday.
And I do, like, we are taking the break from July, so I want to honor that. But coming August 1st, what's going to be different? Or is that sufficiently different, or is there more things we need to be doing?
So my suggestion is that we do need to talk about, or either on a call or outside of the call, on the sort of. So the reason why I was actually advocating for almost like a freeze of features is because I wanted to make sure that the developers in all the teams have the sufficient time to, I don't know, to work out what do we need to do to remediate some of the immediate things. So if we think that this is a really long game and we are prepared to play that game, and comes back to my question, do we want to do that long game or not? Then we haven't figured out any specific technical solution. And I sort of agree with Vitalik here, is that if we have come up with a solution, then people can rally around it. And yeah, so I don't
have technical solutions.
Okay, sorry?
Sorry, I'm totally interrupting you. Sorry, but I think
No,
we do
yes,
have
please.
Sorry, I've been listening this whole time, but I was driving my kids to school and they're loud, so I couldn't chime in until now. Yeah, so I mean, this is of course my opinion of what the technical solution is, and I've presented it before, but I still feel like the solution to client diversity exists at the network level, and it exists in splitting the network up so that we can actually have different kinds of clients, and that we don't have to build monolithic clients, and that this gives us easier to build clients and a more scalable network. Like, I think that we know what needs to be done. We just need to focus more resources on it and get it done.
So the one issue I see with it is that in theory, I kind of agree with it, but in practice, the simplest example will be that while it would be nice if one team could work on running full nodes and another team could work on running a super light client. The issue is that the light client actually needs a light server, which is a full node. So even though it is
I think that we can build light infrastructure that doesn't need light servers.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I did have a proposal for that, but
I guess my concern is that even with that solution existing, is it sufficient to say we don't do anything in the meantime? Like that is a minimum months kind of thing. So then are we comfortable saying we pause stuff until then? I don't know exactly how to move forward.
So stateless is going to take a while because formally supporting stateless requires some multi-stage protocol upgrades that are difficult and hard, and those are being worked on. I am still a very big proponent of building out a DHT-based state network, which can help us in a lot of areas. That's an area that doesn't have a lot of people focusing on it. And that alone takes a lot of burden off of full nodes and different things, and also lets you essentially expose the entirety of the JSON RPC API without even connecting to the dev P2P network. And that is something that should be deliverable within a very small number of months because it's a pretty well understood concept, at least like in the MVP stage. Like, yes, none of these things are things we're going to turn around in like a week or 2 weeks or a month, but like we are facing systemic problems. If somebody shows up with a quick, good, easy solution, we should run with it, but we have good direction on how to handle some of these systemic problems. I think we need to focus on them.
Well, yes, I do see that if we decided that we want to take the long game, play the long game, I would suggest that we find the points where we could split up introduce this kind of modularity, because the idea behind this is that we do want to start separating responsibilities and make sure that we can grow teams and to add resources to the team so that they feel less pressure, that they can have the more specialized people working on components. So we could look at the existing client architectures, see the points where it makes sense to split things up, and then just to work towards the more modular design just for that purpose.
So then do we feature freeze till that point? Is that the suggestion?
Well, the feature freeze, I would suggest it until the point where we actually figure out what we're going to do. Because again, we figuring out exactly which approach is going to work is not quick. I mean, it is going to take a lot of work. I don't know how much. I don't know. But if people prepared, I mean, again, this question goes back to Go Ethereum team, is that because now if we assume that the network runs on Go Ethereum, the question becomes, are these people comfortable with going with the features, or do they need some time to grow, and do they need some time to regroup and things like this? Because actually it's unfair to try to put the pressure up and expect everything to happen, right? We are in these shitty situations, and we either get ourselves out of the situations, or we at least make sure it doesn't kind of break, it doesn't get worse. Because I think if we keep the pressure up with a shitty situation, we're going to make the shitty situation worse, and then the things will happen that might actually not be reversible. So yeah.
Yeah, we're kind of.
I think it's pretty much the situation here is that we either make a great jump and we do it now, or we die eventually. Simple as that. And I personally feel that given the state of the problems with scaling right now, maybe it would even be a good idea to maybe shift much more resources from the development of the current clients that exist today to actually making the new clients based on the modular structure.
I mean that I'm not really sure that. So I don't really understand what that means. I mean, um, you can't really expect me to jump into another client and build that. So what are you suggesting? Who should be jumping to other clients?
And let's just spend a couple more minutes on this to make sure we get to the rest of the stuff on the call.
I think if we have other things to get to, then we probably just need to hard stop because we have 15 minutes.
Yeah, I was gonna give it another 2 minutes and then hard stop it. But
I suggest that if people are willing to keep to talk about this, we could have another kind of unscheduled talk about this. Or we could do it in the chat or whatever form you want. We don't have to only do it once a week, once every 2 weeks. I think if there is an appetite for the discussion, because I do want to get to the point of like, what are we comfortable with, and how do we proceed in such a way that we're not making things worse, and or more importantly, we do not make things worse in an irreversible way, as Peter was suggesting with some of the things that, because there might be something that we can do bad decisions now, but then we can reverse them, but there are some things which you can't reverse, and that's what we want to be careful of.
Yep. So let's get to Kelly. I hope you're still here.
Yes, I am here.
Can you give your update on EIP 2565?
Yeah, sure. So just wanted to provide a quick update into this call. EIP 2565, which was introduced in March to reprice the mod X precompile, has now moved into last call. So I believe about a little over a month ago, it was marked in this call for eligible for inclusion. It's now been finalized fully based off of the feedback and a number of iterations with the Open Ethereum team to look at possible ways to sort of improve the performance of the Open Ethereum client. Ultimately, we weren't able to find a better library to use for Open Ethereum, so there is still, maybe 2 to 3x performance overhead of Open Ethereum versus Geth, but that's something that we'll live with now and at some point hope to optimize in the future. So that's the update. Happy to answer any questions, but just wanted to call out that it is in last call now for through the end of July.
Great, thank you, Kelly. Your work on the EAP is exemplary, and I hope people in the community look at it as an example of how to handle submitting and getting an EIP through the core process.
Thank you.
The next up is so I don't believe there is someone on the call who can respond for technical questions, but there's been, I don't believe Light Client is here either. For the EIP 2718, the type transaction envelope. So we haven't really had a chance to discuss it fully on an Al Cortez call, and I know I'm not in a position to respond on questions, but I did want to get a read from the clients if that is something that could go into EFI, and if there's more questions about it, we'll just have to delay it. But if all the clients feel comfortable that given their understanding that it can go to EFI, I'd like to motion that it does.
I can also potentially answer questions if anybody has them.
Oh, good. Thank you, Barbara.
So I just wanted to mention that this the EIP transaction, I don't know, wrapper something EIP. My only concern is the same that I had with there was this account abstraction EIP with the version numbers, namely that I'm all for supporting multiple versions of transactions if there's a good reason. But I think whenever we introduce versioned transactions, we should also introduce the first new version of a transaction, because otherwise it kind of feels like we're just introducing an abstraction, but we're not really sure how that will look like in the future. So
so 27. Wait, is this 2718 or is there a different number? I don't want
Yes,
to
it
get
is.
wrong.
It's 2718.
So 2718 actually spawned from a different EAP that is introducing a new type of transaction. So it was sponsored transactions, so separate gas payer for a message sender. So we could absolutely bundle this with 2711. Thank you, Micah, which introduces the next type of transaction, which is the sponsored transaction. Or maybe it's not. Maybe it's the. Anyways, there are already at least two other EAPs that build on 2718. So if you want to see how they're used, they are there. Yep, sponsored, batches, and expiration-based transactions.
Yeah, and there was also for EIP 1559, we didn't use type transaction yet because it was just a draft. But as I understand it, it would simplify the implementation a lot if it was part of the protocol before. So if it was EFI, I think there could be a good case for kind of rewriting 1559 once it's farther along to use it, and there'd be benefits to that as well.
Does that resolve your concerns, Peter?
Yep. Thank you.
Cool. Is there Baseud, or I guess let's continue with Geth. Would that moving the type transactions to EFI be okay? I don't know how to ask this exactly. Any more opposition from the Baseud team?
No, I think it would help us with 1559 a lot. So
okay, and Open Ethereum?
No opposition from us.
Nethermind? We are someone from Nethermind able to give a response?
I don't think Nethermind's here. Yeah.
Okay, and then Piper, I'm
like implicitly on board, so and I expect that my client team will be happy to implement it.
Okay.
One thing, yeah, I was just skimming the EIP. I think I brought it up a couple Core F calls ago too. Just wanted to emphasize it that I think currently the EIP allows the current transaction type to have two forms: the current one plus a new wrapped form where the type ID is 0. And the problem with this is that this kind of means that a transaction will have two hashes.
So I believe that we settled on that at the protocol level, only the new format will be allowed, but that it is trivial and that the hashing mechanism for either format would remain the same. So you would get the same hash either way. I'm not 100% sure that that's the latest EAP, but either way, that at the protocol level, only the new format would be allowed, and that eliminates any ambiguity in the header transaction root field, which would be problematic if we allowed either format at the protocol level itself.
So then essentially when the fork hits, we would forbid the old format? And just
I believe that the idea was that the old format can be mapped to the new format, that the new format remain the legacy hashing approach, so that there wouldn't be a big blocker on software that is still submitting, specifically things like hardware or wallets and all kinds of things that would still likely have a long tail to update to submit this new transaction type. So we can still accept the old type, and then clients can internally map it to the new type.
Okay, but that means, so from a signature perspective, then it means that people would be signing the old one.
There's some comments from Micah in the chat that are going by as well.
So,
I'm
so one thing
trying
that,
to. So let's see. Signing. Yeah. So signing on the old and new one are the same. So the new format is literally just a reshuffling of the old fields and adding the type to the front. That's it.
Well, yeah, but then what happens if I introduce a new type? What will that sign?
The new type would follow whatever EAP specifies it. So this is essentially backwards compatible. We just, at the protocol level, force the legacy transaction format into the new format. And it gets a special set of hashing and signing rules that may not be orthogonal or the same as whatever new transaction types we introduce.
Well, yeah, but the fact, so if you say that you at the protocol level you change the format, but at the signing level you don't change the format, then you still end up with this mixed bag of things.
No, there's no problem with a mixed bag because at the protocol level only typed transaction envelope type transactions are represented.
Yeah, but if I only sign the internals of a transaction, then I can arbitrarily change the wrapper. I can change from type 1 to type 2 to type 3, and
that would be so we would need to look at that, but I do not believe that I don't believe that there is any practical problem here because there's a strong recommendation in the spec that all new type transactions include the transaction type in their signature. And so it's something that we would just need to pay attention to going forward. But I do not believe there's any actual systemic problem. We just need to make sure that we don't accidentally introduce a new transaction type that can be mapped to the legacy transaction type or something like that.
But yeah, but if you enforce the transaction type to be part of the signature, then that holds for the legacy type too. Or not?
We're not enforcing it. It's just a strong recommendation in the base, spec.
But what does it mean? I mean, that means that I get the choice whether I want to sign something or not. So currently the signature is deterministic.
I would recommend that you go read through 2718 because I think that if you do and you look at the way that we're mapping legacy transactions, you'll see that this is likely not an issue. And if it is, I'm more than happy to see it, but I do not think that there is a problem here.
Okay, fair enough.
Great. So I'd say that I remind everyone that EFI doesn't mean something is going into the core client, into ETH1 or the core client protocol, but that it's the first step in many stages, and that it be moved to EFI at this point. And that, I believe, is all for today. Let me look at.
I had a kind of proposal and agenda for discussion, but Alexei has answered kind of it with his comments that it takes 40 milliseconds for miner to assemble the block to remain profitable. So I would want to discuss another question which I actually wanted to post on a previous call. As a part of the work in like 2537, I have spent quite some time to make state tests for clients using the suggested retest as tool and a manual which came along it, which actually diverged quite a lot from the from the current state. That actually state test in a form which is written in a manual is deprecated now in Gas, and it should not have worked, but I had to monkey patch it, and then it started to work again. So after all this discussion started, that we, let's try to postpone the forks until clients can get to the speed, and that there is potential pressure on Gas team to ensure the code quality and no consistency issues between Gas and other clients. Can we also discuss that current state of testing tools for Ethereum is, I would say, quite low, and it was very painful. to write the state tests, and like for everyone less prepared and less determined to make like to introduce a large change with EAP, it wouldn't be prohibitively hard, I think.
Yes,
and
you totally. I mean, that is totally the case, and it has been so
Wholeheartedly agree.
for a long time. And it's not something we have managed to solve.
so maybe this would be a better priority with a clear like direction and direction for solution than trying to make without any data and clear solution like client diversity, but maybe make first better tooling. So it would be easier for like current teams to actually ensure the code quality than trying to change the full state of the network to run many different clients. And this way, like if something happens that only 20% of the network is down, it's still like the solution sounds kind of well defined, that better tooling is needed and there should be some resources spent on this. And it's also the same kind of work as if it's done, it will not make things worse, even
Right.
if the
So,
effect
I mean,
will be not not
you-
great. Yeah.
So I
Sorry, Martin.
totally agree with what you're saying. So I don't have any issues with what you're saying. But to give some context, we have been trying to improve the tooling for a long time. As late as I think last week, someone turned down. We had interviews with a potential lead to help revamp the testing solutions. There is actively we are actively looking for someone to basically take the lead on that, and it's something that has been we've been trying to address these issues for a long time.
Yeah, we've been talking about it for at least a year, and that's just Martin and I.
Yeah, this is,
Yeah.
We're at 9:29, so I do like the direction of conversation and how to get more resources and people to dedicate resources to testing would be great. It has been very difficult in the past to make that happen. It's been attempted a few times. Maybe we'll go a little bit. I don't really want to go over, but if someone has something that they feel strongly about sharing at this point, I would invite that they do that, and otherwise we can continue offline. And I would like to schedule a call for probably next week to continue this conversation. For people that are
well,
interested.
as a person who spent quite some time pushing for 2537 for consensus between different clients on Berlin, and if it actually can be kind of scheduled sooner or later in a reasonable time frame. And in the meantime, maybe it's worth pushing ModExp and static calls there too.
We're currently right now investigating what we think is a consensus failure. It's not in a good state, and we have several weeks of actively fuzzing it before we can feel anywhere near comfortable with it.
Okay, well, we can discuss this part offline or in a fuzzing, like separate fuzzing call.
Yeah, thank you for dog fooding our testing infrastructure, Alex. Or I guess that's, yeah, I was supposed to be kind of a funny joke, but I'm not very funny, so here we are.
That's fine.
Thank you all for joining today. It was a great conversation. And I'll start pinging people about if there's a time we could continue on this, on the client diversity topic on a separate call, perhaps next week. If you're interested, let me know. And have a good day.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye. Take care.